Our inaugural lecturer is Sadie Creese, Professor of Cybersecurity at the University of Oxford, and I'll say a bit more about Sadie's background in a minute. I'm no expert in cybersecurity, but I use a computer, and I think that's probably the same for many people in the room. So the topic of cybersecurity needs no introduction to us in this day and age. We live in a digital age, we live in an information-rich data environment. Some of this is very personal, our banking, which we do from our phones, online purchasing, social media. Beware of Facebook. I know employers that trawl it to find information on people applying for jobs. A lot of it is corporate. So banks, universities like ourselves have a lot of data and information. And there are bigger societal issues, just like running the National Health Service with the amount of data that needs transferring, energy companies, and of course, defence and terrorism. Now, this information and data is very valuable, and loss of it can cause personal, financial, or even reputational damage. And I'll just make a comment here that somebody from Sadie's University at Oxford said at a meeting recently. They said if, for example, Oxford lost its final exam papers through a cyber attack or hackers, what would that mean for the reputation of the university if you couldn't think a first-class honours degree was a first-class honours degree at Oxford? So it's more than just money, it's more than just safety, it's very widespread. So recent reports of the Financial Times have quoted that the UK Cabinet Office has estimated the cost of cybercrime to the economy is probably around £27 billion per year, and that's probably out of date. A White House white paper from 2 years ago estimated that the value of data theft to the US is close to $1 trillion US. So there are a number of important questions to be answered. How do we protect our data and our information? How do we train and educate students and graduates and those in work now to combat hackers and to protect against security breaches? How do we identify and stop cyber attacks? And then there's a message here for the entrepreneurs in the audience, which I found out recently. There are opportunities in this, I guess we could call it crisis of cybersecurity, to develop and sell solutions for cybercrime. The information security spending in the US is set to rise 7.1% from last year to this year, and will reach a spending of $108 billion by 2019. That's one figure, but perhaps the more interesting one is that recently the market valuation of 3 small leading data protection companies in the US has risen on average by 50% in 1 year. So there are people investing in shares, stocks and shares, making money from this. So anyway, enough of the background. Our speaker tonight, Sadie Creese, is Professor of Cybersecurity in the Department of Computer Science at the University of Oxford, where she has been since 2011. Currently, she is Director of Oxford Cybersecurity Centre, Director of the Global Centre for Cybersecurity Capacity Building at Oxford, and Co-Director of the Institute for Future of Computing at the Oxford Martin School. Her research experience is probably very unique as it spans time in academia, in industry and in government. Before she went to Oxford, she was at Warwick from 2007 as Director of E-Security at the International Digital Laboratory, and before her time at Warwick she was Director of Strategic Programmes for Kinetic, Trusted Information Management Division. So with no further ado, I'd like to now invite Professor Creese to give her lecture, Cybersecurity Futures, the Ultimate Human Technology Challenge. Sadie.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Yeah? Great. So first of all, I should say it's a real honour and a privilege to be invited here today. So thank you for that. It's particularly important to me, and I hope this shines through as we go through the lecture, to be at a university that is so focused not only on cutting-edge research, but on its application for impact and for good. And you will get a feel as I talk to you tonight that I fundamentally believe cybersecurity is an applied discipline and is a science of sciences, if you like. And in addressing the challenges that we have to face, we must be driven, literally driven by the coalface and its application, even as we reach back and work on the underlying theories beneath our solutions. And so it's really exciting to be at a university that has that at its heart. And before I get stuck in, I'll give you a small update on my bio, which is I'm actually now on sabbatical. So I'm no longer director of the Cybersecurity Centre at Oxford. I've stepped down from that. but have kept the capacity centre. So here we go. Right, so I put it to you, cybersecurity and the future challenge is the ultimate human technology challenge. We'll see if I can convince you of this. This is not Cybersecurity 101, I should say. So, what does it mean to be cyber secure? Well, we have some heritage, and I imagine all of you have a different understanding of how we've arrived at this concept of cybersecurity. Many years ago, we were very concerned with network security, computer security, and so those of us in the business of computer science or information science or technology and engineering, information engineering, we worried very much about securing the communications that were coming down our networks, down our cabling, and we worried very much about securing our computers. And when I was a student of computer science, I can remember seeing demonstrations of hacks which were not simply logical hacks, but actually I saw someone at a conference take out a hairdryer, take the shell off of the tower, because we were working with tower things on desks in those days, point it at the hardware, flip a few bits and manage to get in. And that was fascinating. And that's really the kind of thing that we were worried about. So there's a lot of encryption, there was a lot of key management, there was a lot of physical tamper-proof concerns. And obviously industry was also worried about this too. And then we moved into the era of information security. And that's very important because all of a sudden that's a recognition of where your value is, your value at risk. And it was a recognition that although, yes, we cared very much about the computing power and the hardware and the binary and the communications and the cabling, fundamentally, actually, it was the data and the information that we arrived at from that data that we wanted to protect. And that, of course, gave rise to all sorts of other kinds of controls and ways of delivering security. And I guess it's around that era that I must have left academia and taken up my first post as a military researcher. And in those early years, we moved from information security to information assurance. So in the world of information security, we might worry about, as you might assume, confidentiality, we might worry about integrity, that no one can actually manipulate it, and we might worry a lot about that we can get access to it, availability, and all sorts of other properties, like you can't lie to me. If you do something, it really was you that did it, or only people that are allowed to manipulate this data and this information can do so. And there's all sorts of security controls that will flow from that, like access control and the like. Information assurance is slightly different. Information assurance is a recognition that one has to have confidence in these claims of information security. I have to be assured in some way. And that brought to the environment all sorts of other controls that were designed to create that kind of assurance. It was also fundamentally, I would say, when we really took on the notion that there was no such thing as 100% security, that this is actually about risk and acceptance of risk, and how much risk are we willing to take. How do we therefore bring together various controls to protect this information so that we arrive at some acceptable understanding of the risk that's left, that we're faced with moving forward. And that's the heritage. And for some, cybersecurity has been a wholesale rebranding of information assurance, if you like. But for others, cybersecurity is something much broader, and I am in the others' camp. And so I'm going to explain to you why I think it's broader. But before we do that, we will do some fundamentals, because of course one can't stand up and do a cybersecurity lecture of any kind without just talking around some basic concepts. So, well, we worry a lot about attacks. Now, attacks, and don't worry, you don't actually have to read the slide, but you're welcome to, and it will be there for you after the lecture. Attacks, in the cyber sense, take very many different forms, and I guess in many ways it relates very much to what we see as our asset base that we're protecting today. And so the definition you see up on the slide is the definition we commonly work with our students today, and we talk about electronic attacks to people, to enterprises, to hardware, to software. We worry about information and data. We worry about the compromise of user accounts. We talk about communications, and we talk about physical assets. And you see at the bottom of the slide, typically compromising information confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And these kinds of attacks Well, how do they work? Well, they work by exploiting what we would talk about as being a vulnerability in a system. Now, a vulnerability could quite commonly be some kind of error in the coding. And when I say error, it could be that what we've done is when we've built this technology, we've built it in such a way that we assume some kind of interaction with its environment. So it assumes, let's say, it's technology in a car, it assumes that Sadie is going to drive this car a certain way. And so the kinds of communications I give the car, the kinds of ways I stimulate the car, turning the wheel, pushing the buttons, whatever it may be, they are going to generate certain signals. And the software and the middleware and the technology inside the car will deal with those and interpret them correctly. Well, in many systems, unfortunately for us, what we've done is we've built technology that can't deal with the unexpected very well. And we call those runtime errors. They have various flavors. It's very low-hanging fruit if you're an attacker. If you were going to try and hack in from the outside of a system, whether it's a car, somebody's website, some corporate environment, your smartphones, then you would always go for some runtime errors. You just try and chuck some stuff at it and see if it falls over, and in the act of falling over, whether it will relinquish some control to you. And that's, in the olden days, that's really the kind of attacks we faced. And what happened was people would take control of a box, whatever that box may be, and then they would move around. And they would see if they could elevate their access privileges. So they would see, let's say, if I had really low-level access privileges, I could only see certain data on that system, I could only get to certain places on the system, on the network. But someone else, let's say my mum, had access to huge amounts more of that system, then they would try and become the mum on the system. And that's how it goes. And in many organisations, that would be called a sysadmin. Of course, in some organisations, you'd be very interested in a vice-chancellor or a CEO and what they might be able to do and see. Nevertheless, that's the kind of way we might attack. And those are the kinds of vulnerabilities. But there's other vulnerabilities too. As soon as you understand your system as having people in it, then we can be a source of vulnerability. We can be the toehold into the system. You can find some way of convincing Sadie to give you her password. So you don't need to hack into the system. You just need a valid way of accessing it, and you can log in as me, and you can do everything that I can do. Of course, then you might blend that with one of these elevated privileges attacks, get in there as Sadie, try and find some way of becoming my mum and then accessing everything that she can access, and so it goes on. And so what you see on the slide here is reference to some very common standards that we work with, in particular things like ISO 27005. There's a definition of what we talk about, weaknesses in assets and vulnerabilities there, and we have the NIST references. But essentially, take it from me, it's a weakness in a system that can be exploited, okay? And then we think about these things and these attacks more in terms of process and control flow, because they're not actually just a single event. Typically, they're far more sophisticated. And some of you may remember the press that we saw around something called a Stuxnet attack a couple of years ago. And don't worry if you didn't, I'll explain it. So it made the press. It was probably the first time that we saw one of these attacks gaining so much interest in the public eye. And the reason why it gained so much interest in the public eye is because it was an attack on a nuclear refinement facility. And so that had the potential to go bang and cause massive loss of human life. And as soon as that made the general public's eye in the press, of course, people started to consider very hard what was the nature of these attacks. And did we have a blend of safety critical concerns with security critical concerns? Now, I can tell you, for those of us who've been in the business and been in the research and the science space or in at the coalface, these attacks, of course, have been going on for years, this kind of thing. But this changed the game because it was out there. And Stuxnet is very interesting, as are all of the sophisticated attacks, because they involve many different steps. And what I show you up here is the kill chain model, which was first developed by Lockheed Martin. And whether or not you prescribe to believe that this is the right model for understanding the phases of an attack, it certainly has gained credibility in the industry, and everybody is able to talk about this. So I'm going to talk you through it because it's very interesting. And in general, of course, this is the way things go. And it's not just, of course, in cybersecurity. Any attack would look like this. So initially, you would do some reconnaissance. You would need to understand the nature of the thing that it is that you want to compromise the security of. And that would be true if it were a cyber system or a physical system or a person, like me. So, for example, let's say you do want to hack me. Well, the reconnaissance might well be, where does Sadie go? Who does she talk to? What kinds of bars does she drink in? Does she go and drink in bars? How might I strike up a conversation with her? How might I gain her trust? How might I access her technology? How might I plant something on there, like malware, and become Sadie? That kind of thing. So there's always reconnaissance at the beginning. Once you understand what it is you're going after, let's say it's a system, in Stuxnet's case, they wanted to get on the inside of a process control system in an environment that would have been very heavily protected, a nuclear refinement facility. And once you've found out how you're going to get in, we do some weaponizations in a cyber sense. So we design the mechanism by which we're going to attack the system. Now, in many attacks, there's multiple weapons used. But let's just consider one, a piece of malware. And the piece of malware is designed to get on board the system, to have a look around the network, understand what's there, work out where on the system the interesting pieces of technology are that one wants to attack, work out what they are, what configuration they're in, and then reach back, download the payload, the weaponized payload, that will then be installed locally and used to compromise that box. And in the Stuxnet case, what they did is they managed to change the code on this piece of technology, and it made things that were meant to whir around at predictable speeds go very, very, very fast, very, very, very slow. Interestingly, nothing went bang. And I'm not on the inside of this, and certainly we've seen nothing in the open that would tell us, was it designed not to go bang? Did the attack fail in some way? Or was it a practice run? Or was it a show of force? Look what we can do. We're not going to make it go bang, but look, we can be here and we can change things. And I don't know the answer to that. And so we see here we have exploitation. We install the exploitation. That was the manipulation of the code. The command and control is the longevity. So in some cases, they're not smash and grab. These things stay on systems. They can stay on systems for years. Stuxnet was there for at least a year. Some people think more than that before it was discovered. And then there's actions on intent. Now, actually, this model was designed to talk about something called an advanced persistent threat. And that brings me on to the nature of threat. So in the very, very olden days, we were very concerned with somebody hacking in, grabbing something, changing something, let's say manipulating a web page to say, hoo-hoo, we were here. Aren't you embarrassed that we were here? And for some organisations, that's enough. That's embarrassing. You don't need to do any more than that. And that's more of a smash and grab. You go in, you do what you need to do, you come out again. In other situations, and increasingly so, actually these attackers are looking for serendipity. They get into the system and they hang around. They might have gone there to get something in particular, but they hang around and see what else they might find that might be valuable. And Stuxnet's not the only example of that. In fact, if you're a computer scientist, there was something called Flame that was soon discovered afterwards in the coming months, which was, in terms of architecture, incredibly elegant, and one had to respect it. It was extremely modular. It was a piece of malware that could get onto a system and it could notice what you were doing and then download new ways of behaving. So it could say, oh, you use a Bluetooth wireless headset device. Right, reach back via the command and control, download the payload to compromise your Bluetooth wireless and record it. It was almost like an intelligence gathering mechanism. Oh, you're using instant messenger, are you? Right, reach back, get the compromise from instant messenger, compromise your security, record what you're saying. And of course, many of you in the room will feel that none of this ever applies to you, and let's hope you're right. But we'll get to it. So here's an example, actually. This happened to a very well-known company in 2013. And really, in essence, what this was a compromise of the card readers at point of sale. So if you imagine years ago, you might have been very worried about somebody taking a physical copy of your card. Do you remember? If you went to a restaurant, the advice was, don't let it leave your sight, don't let the waiter take it back, or waitress for 10 minutes. You know, really cause a fuss if that happens, because they might well physically be copying your card. Well, of course, in the digital world, that's quicker and easier to do. And so what this was a piece of malware that was literally doing that, but using technology. And it went across the point of sale for a large organisation. Now, the customers lost a lot of money, and the company lost a lot of money. But when this all went boom in the public eye, various things were revealed that were very interesting. So, for example, this particular organisation was actually employing a company to monitor their networks. And they did actually have a system in place that would have spotted that malware. And in fact, the claim was made that the alarms were raised. But unfortunately, of course, there were thousands of alarms raised that day. And the consequence of that was they didn't act on this one. And so the reason why this is perhaps important to all of us in the room is that this is also the first big example of members of the board losing their jobs as a result of a cyber attack. And these are not the obvious cyber responsible members of the board. And so what we're seeing now is a shift towards a recognition that cyber is so integral to the success of our companies that it is a risk that we all share in the management of. Unfortunately for us, of course, it's incredibly intangible for most. But it means heads will roll if we don't actually act in good governance. So here's the challenge. Attackers, of course, do not necessarily look like that. In fact, I would imagine very few, I would hypothesise. And in fact, they can be incredibly hard to spot. It's not as easy as looking for that. In fact, the challenge is more like finding someone in that street scene, and they could be anywhere in the world. Because, of course, the cost of entry to cyberspace is very low. In fact, it could be just a smartphone. So in terms of tooling up, very low investment. In terms of skilling up, well, of course, common attacks get de-skilled and you can download the tools. More sophisticated attacks you need big skills for. So we face a significant challenge. And one of the areas in which we've been working most recently is trying to understand how we make sense of the connection between humans and human psychology and the more conventional attack steps that I've been describing to you, which is the obvious ones. Find a route in, write a piece of software to compromise it, steal what you need to steal, change what you need to change. And what I'm showing you on the slide here is the beginnings of some thinking about how we might connect the psychology of people. In particular, this particular anatomy is looking at what we refer to as an insider threat. Now, insiders are very, very important to all of us, not least, and I'll give you some examples in a moment, because every single system, in fact, is going to be open in the future, which means, conversely, everybody's on the inside. Very hard. But if you don't know where to put your perimeters, if everything is connecting with everything, then there's no barriers, which means we're all on the inside. And so the bad news is that, of course, we've built a lot of our security defences over the years based on keeping bad things out. It's very natural. It's a very human instinct. So you will lock your front door because you think that's going to help stop you getting burgled by the burglar that will stumble upon your house and try it. And that happens. I've been burgled, and it was an opportunistic situation. They did a number on the road. So we're used to that. We're used to border control. We're used to locking our cars. We are used to, as humans, understanding the physicality of security and space and personal space and ownership of assets. Unfortunately, that does not translate easily into cyberspace. For most of you, I'd hazard a guess, in today's modern systems, you perhaps wouldn't know what the equivalent was in terms of locking your front door for most people. And that's a big challenge. Now, the consequence of not being able to put up the barriers means that everybody's almost on the inside. So they already have access. So they don't have to hack in from the outside. They're there and they're present. And that has a big cause of concern for all of us, because if you imagine, if you're present for a persistent amount of time, then you have access potentially to lots more, and you have access and the ability to cause lots more damage, and ultimately to cause harm. And where there is the potential to cause great harm, there's also motivation and almost an amplification potential for the threat. And so if we worry about the economics that surround these kinds of systems, then there's an issue. And if you start thinking about concepts like cloud computing, and for those of you that perhaps are not familiar with that, but maybe you're used to, for example, storing all your music on the cloud or storing all your photos online somewhere, essentially putting your digital assets remotely, not locally, then you need to understand that, of course, if somebody were to hack that remote store, they would get access to everybody's assets, But if we all had it locally, they'd have to hack all of us. And so you can see in a very quick and basic way that there's a concern as we move forward and we take advantage of this brilliant technology and share in it. And there are many reasons for doing that insiders become very concerning for us. So cybersecurity, why would we need it? Well, okay, so we know that there's attacks and we know that we have assets that we want to protect, and they may be different depending on who we are. Some of them are personal, some of them belong to the organisations we work for. Some of them sit in what we would call the critical national infrastructures. So they are the financial systems, they are the transport systems, they are the energy systems, they're the things that keep us talking on our phones, they're the things that keep food on the shelves, and frankly, they underpin stability for many nations. And if you look at the vision for how we're going to help the world and how we're going to help developing economies realise better futures, and if you sit in any of those debates, then you will know that the vision is technology will underpin this. So whether it's microsatellites connected with very small, intricate sensors throughout farms in Middle Africa, helping us grow crops more effectively and efficiently, it's technology that drives it. If it's worrying about how we are going to make our cities work more effectively and in a greener fashion, it's technology that will drive it. In fact, the vision is fully instrumentized humanity in many ways. And so with that, of course, comes some level of societal and technological dependency on the technology and on each other, between the technologies, between the users of the technologies, whether they are people or organisations. And then there's criticality, because some of that interdependency we don't care about. And frankly, I'm obviously much older than I look, and so I don't socialise as heavily as I once did as a student. It would not be the end of the world to me if I couldn't use my mobile phone for a while. In fact, it would probably be quite liberating, to be honest. But for some people, that kind of loss in communications would be very dramatic. But for others, not being able to access their money in the bank would be very dramatic. For others, having their car hacked so that people could know exactly where they were going, they would care about. For others, you've given it away. You've signed up to some kind of geonavigation service and you've already shared that data. For some of you, you care a lot about privacy. For some of you, it matters to you, perhaps, that you can surf the internet and shop and socialise in a way that nobody could predict that much about you, that you had some notion of privacy there. And for others of you, you've given that all up and you're quite willing to share all of that. And we all have different drivers. And some of it really matters, some of it doesn't, is variable. And unfortunately, in the game of cybersecurity or information assurance or even information security, understanding what matters and where the impact sits and where the harm sits is a challenge. And that takes me to this entanglement and this notion of vulnerability. One of the areas of research that I've been very heavily involved with in recent years is understanding what it means to have identity in this modern era. Understanding how my cyber online identity connects with my identity in this more physical space. And what that means for us as people, and whether we should be concerned if those connections can be reconstructed or not, and how critical it is to me as a human being that I can express myself freely in these ways. And in fact, we began this research because I'm not sure if you recall, but there was a photograph put on a social media site by the wife of somebody who was in a very significant senior post in the UK government. And the press got wind of it, and there was a big, huge hoo-ha about whether this was introducing a security risk to the UK, because people would be able to understand perhaps something about this person's family, where they went on holiday, that kind of thing, and that could be used to target them. And so in my group, we said, oh, well, that sounds great. Let's try and disprove the hype. Everybody's jumped on that bandwagon. Everyone thinks this is a really terrible thing, what we're putting out in social media, and it's possible connection in other parts of our lives. So we'll stand up a research program and we'll try and assess how bad it really is. And we built a model, and the model was designed to take account of all the claims in the open people were making of what they could learn about you if they could find out A and B, then they could deduce C, say, or induce D. Can they get to Z if they can find A and D? That kind of thing. And we did some maths, basic graph analytics, bundled all of these things together and enabled people to ask those kinds of questions of it. And I can tell you now the situation was much worse than anybody had imagined. And so then I recruited a couple of people I knew that my research team didn't know from other parts of the world who were in very significant jobs, very significant cybersecurity jobs, operational jobs. The kinds of people that if you wanted to get into the organisation they were working for, then they could switch the lights out and turn the system off for a while and make it so that nobody would know you were there whilst you were going in and stealing the intellectual property or whatever it is you wanted to do. So the kinds of people that you might consider people might want to target. And they willingly said, yes, sure, see what you can do with me, but promise me you'll stop if it looks really bad. And of course we did. And we advised them afterwards. And it was very interesting. With one of these people, the whole pack of cards came down. And bearing in mind that my research team is not made up of professionally trained analysts or pen testers or etc., although they're very smart scientists. And they work in the space. And the other person, perhaps more interestingly for all of us, had gone to great lengths to keep their social identities separate from their work identities. And what we found was a single piece of information, one piece of information, that linked those two parts of their lives. And in that link, various interesting things could be deduced about them. And in this case, by the way, they were not given names of people. They were given different pieces of information. Try and find someone interesting based on this, anywhere in the world. And they found them. It took a few days, but they found them. And this is a number of years ago. And what this did is this told us something. It told us that, and you'll all be fully aware of this now, of course, that actually it does matter how we express ourselves, and that maybe we are opening ourselves to risk. Because certainly we're opening ourselves up to the potential for highly targeted attacks on us as individuals. And whether you have felt any of these or not, whether you've fallen prey to some kind of romance scam, lost your identity credentials because you gave something away, whether you've been, unfortunately, given your organisation, laid it open to attack because you did actually phone up tech support and give them your password when you were sent that email, whatever it might have been, unfortunately, the truth of the matter is that we are inside the system as people, and so consequently we are of interest, and we can be compromised and we can become a foothold. And so now we understand, years later, that this identity that we have as individuals is very entangled. It doesn't make any sense anymore to silo it. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever to talk about your online selves as separate to any other representation of yourself. And in fact, if we stick with that, then any defences we craft will just be behind the curve, because the people that are attacking us understand the nature of the entanglement. And there's some fascinating results coming out. So in psychology, for example, we're being told that the relationships we form online, there's something about that online experience that makes them so much deeper and stronger. And consequently, it means that online is a very good place to recruit people and coerce people to do things that they would not otherwise have done. And so cyber is becoming even more critical and even more important to all of us. And yet there's a huge upside. So many of you, I guess, socialise heavily online. You probably never thought about it in those terms, but there's this process that we go through as humans, and the validation we get from having thousands of people say, great, I like what you had for dinner. That's cool. Okay. And now increasingly, of course, we're thinking about this in the context of international stability. And so we've gone from tech to tech plus data and information, to tech plus intelligence, tech for individuals in the home, for the planet, for organisations that really matter to our economies. And now, of course, you may have seen in the papers, we're talking about the ability to use technology in the context of acts of war, in the context of international terrorism, in the context of state-on-state interactions. And because of our interdependency and the importance to our economies, we're now talking about it in the context of international stability. And there's so many debates that come into this, not least who gets to control cyberspace and what does it mean to control cyberspace, who gets to say who names what and how much space there is for that. And so I wanted to share with you perhaps this more broader understanding of what we mean by cybersecurity, what it means to be cybersecure. It is not just about the confidentiality of our data or our information. It's not just about having it available to us. It's not just about making sure that only Sadie can manipulate the data and the bytes that Sadie should be able to manipulate. It's so much more. In fact, it's about people. And cybersecurity is about cyberspace. And everything that the space has around it and the connotations, it's about us, how we organise, our emotional response to that space, how we feel about it. Is it enabling us to do as a humanity what we seek to do, as an industry what we seek to do, and it's an environment. And as soon as we accept that it's critical to modern life, then it's an environment we have to worry about sustaining for our grandkids and beyond. And it is an environment that is potentially being eroded in many different ways. And so I think as we move forward, that what you will begin to notice in the discussions and the debates around cyberspace and cybersecurity is a debate around our obligations as citizens of cyberspace and as organisations and as industry exploiting it, and what we might need to do to make sure that it remains as an environment that we can all take part in. And so for me, that's what cybersecurity is. As I say, not for everybody, but they'll get there. And so as we look to the future and we begin to think about where the challenges are, well, I guess many of you will have heard about this thing we refer to as IoT, or Internet of Things. And that is the vision that I was trying to communicate earlier of an instrumented planet. I would say it goes beyond a planet, because actually for many years we've actually had IP-enabled geostationary satellites. So that's internet protocol. So for many years, although it hasn't been switched on, we could have routed data between the satellites, space assets, in the same way that we route data around the internet on the planet. And and we can also hack satellites in the same way that we might do that. And all these same kinds of security properties may be of interest to us. But the point here is this, that the vision, whether you like it or not, is massive instrumentalization. And it's very, very big, and very, very small. And so when I say very, very small, it's nanoscale machines communicating and collaborating. And in fact, we have an expert of nano in the audience, of course. I'm not an expert in nano, but I'm fascinated by nano, not least because I'm told it's still the case that some materials are very difficult to detect the presence of. And the reason why that fascinates me is if I could use nano to be some kind of delivery device for some malware, and you're telling me that there's no way of detecting the presence of that nanomaterial, then that's very worrying to me from a security perspective. So I'm fascinated by it. But nevertheless, if that's true or not, very, very, very small things, very, very hard to see, all moving around, connecting us. In fact, in truth, we're all going to become cyborgs. So we had an interesting conversation walking over here about, well, you know, are artificial intelligence's robots going to be driving our cars? Well, the answer is yes. Because we are going to be the cyborgs within 50 years. We're all going to be tech-enabled. And it's going to be very hard for us to pull that apart. And it's going to be very hard for us to know who's become tech-enabled and what kind of tech-enabling they've got and what's inside their body and their clothes, etc. But nevertheless, there will be a convergence of that. So as the planet produces, using small things, medium-sized things, and huge things, data off the scale, and I've put no numbers here because frankly any time you go and look up any suggestion of the understanding of how much data we are going to create as a humanity, how many apps will be built, how many sensors will be present in our environment, I can tell you everybody just shifts the scale again every time by a factor of 10. There's no point. It's very, very large. And we already face a problem dealing with this very, very large stuff on many, many levels. Not least, of course, how one stores it and how one processes it and how one does all of that effectively and gets some real value from it. But it's a problem for us in security if we're worrying about securing your privacy. Because, of course, when you shove all of this data together, there's a big question mark, isn't there, as to what one might be able to learn about people and whether one might be able to compromise your privacy. But nevertheless, we're going to have huge amounts of unknown provenance of technology pervading our environment. And all of us will be cyber-enabled, more or less. Some of us less than others. And we will make up that environment. We'll be part of that system. And so there's various pieces of our current control space that we might refer to as baggage, that we're left with in the cybersecurity domain. And I was going to just talk through a few of them for you. Not because I think they're necessarily all bad, but because I think you'll agree with me that they are significantly challenged by this future. Some of you will think they're challenged now, and let's see. So, this is showing my age. I don't know how many of you remember the don't click on the .exe. When I was a student, an undergraduate, that was the security advice. Because in those days, there were pictures of pretty people going around. Don't click on the executable that was hidden in the picture. If your friend sends you an email and there's an attachment that's a .exe file, an executable file, don't open that. Classic virus material. This is years ago. Of course, if you think to your smartphones nowadays and your use of apps and how you download them, you'll immediately come to the realization that this kind of advice doesn't work for us because the business models are such that we're all expected to download executables from people that we didn't know and stick them on these pieces of software onto our personal devices. But what we do now, actually, is we say, unless you have some good virus protection or you bought it from this app store, because this app store checks these things aren't malicious. Well, I'm telling you now that that is not to be trusted either, and that it's absolutely possible for these things to be fairly malign. In fact, there's lots of evidence that they're fairly malign. But we all want to use that functionality and we want the service more than we care about the risk. And that comes down to the tangibility of risk. Another one, well, you'll understand why I wrote this one down. Stay out, don't bring it inside. Well, my first job, when I went to work for the MOD, we were not allowed things like personal comms in the building. So you wouldn't be allowed to bring in a phone. I can remember when phones started getting cameras. And anyone that had a camera phone, it wasn't allowed on site. Well, I challenge you to buy a phone without a camera nowadays. That would be really difficult, wouldn't it? I remember when we first had cameras put into tellies, and my husband wanted one of these TVs in our living room. And of course, he's married to the paranoid freak. And I'm like, why would I want a camera in my living room, potentially hackable, watching me sat there, watching telly? But nowadays, of course, increasingly, it's going to be really hard to not buy a telly without a camera. But nevertheless, it used to be the case that we used to say, this kind of stuff, this is risky, this could cause us, this could be a way of attacking us, don't bring it anywhere near us. Nowadays, totally impractical. Many large firms will talk about operating bring your own device policies, where they'll say to you, we're not going to provide you anymore with a work phone, we'll give you a budget, choose the phone you want. And you know what they do as a security control? Well, there's a few things they do. The ones that are on the front end of this, they'll do things like they'll make you sign a form and they'll say, well, we're going to be monitoring this system that your phone's connected to. And if we have any reason to think that your phone is the delivery platform for some malware, we're going to remotely wipe it for you without telling you. Now, as a security person, I say that's fair enough. If you're going to take the risk of letting anyone bring anything in to your system, then it's kind of fair enough if you've got good reason to think that it's been compromised. And bear in mind, most of you will have been compromised and you may not know it. All of us, not just you, me too, right? I mean, famous pieces of malware like Stuxnet, they're all over the internet, but if you're not operating a system that has that vulnerability, it doesn't do anything, it just sits on your device. So we've all got stuff. It's a bit like a public health campaign, really. We've got immune systems, we're all carrying things, they don't necessarily make us ill, but unfortunately we do actually, maybe we transmit and move them around. So this doesn't work anymore, does it? Well, of course it doesn't work anymore. Nobody knows what it means to bring anything inside anymore. Check you've done everything on this list, including getting a pen test. Well, for those of you that work in business and you work in some kind of regulated environment, and I don't necessarily mean to do with cybersecurity, but you'll be used to compliance checklists of some kind. Do A, B, and C, and you keep your accreditation. You're determined to be an organisation that will function a certain way. In fact, growing up, many of us would have had a similar regime with our parents, I'm sure. Be home by 10 o'clock, Phone me if you're going to be late. You still get to have a social life next week. Do your homework, you get to have a social life. Pass your exams, you get to have a social life. Well, it's the similar thing, only for the same reason, of course, there's no guarantees. You tell your kid, do your homework. It doesn't mean they're an A-grade student. You tell your kid, you come home at 10 o'clock at night unless you phone, and you're not guaranteeing their future outcomes. Same thing is true here. So we have checklists in security. We've spent many years coming up with what we understand to be good practice. Use a firewall. If you do an adaptation to your website, pay somebody to try and hack it for you and tell you whether it's hackable. That's a pen test, a penetration test. We're trying to do things that check for insiders. Check your staff before you hire them. Make sure that they don't have a criminal record. Make sure they're a trustworthy person. There's all sorts of controls. It doesn't guarantee you anything, but it's a layer. You're trying to establish some kind of baseline. Unfortunately, we have very good examples of people following this kind of regime, and it tells you nothing about their environment. It tells you nothing. On that one day, they managed their technology in this way. 364 days of the year after that, they did not, but they still achieved this accreditation. Read this every year to make sure you know. Well, I don't know what the University of Bradford does, but I wonder when you arrived tonight, whether you had to sign anything, or if you're students, whether you signed something to say that you will adhere to policies when you take on your student identity, that kind of thing. Well, something that we do in the commercial world very often is we run awareness campaigns, and this is true in cybersecurity too. So we try and educate people. This is the threat. This is the risk the organisation runs. This is what we expect of you. Please will you watch this? We'll tick the box that you did it. Well, what we know from research is that if you're not doing it every day, in fact, roughly speaking, if you're not using it within about 2 or 3 weeks as a day-to-day part of your job, it's gone. So that tick in the box, that's worthless if you're not changing what people do in their workplace. And that, by the way, applies in your home life too, right? It applies in every aspect of what we do, but it's a particular weakness at the moment in cybersecurity. So build your system from things which have this logo. Dear to my heart, when I first was working out in industry, what we did is we had ways of saying this piece of technology, and this is we must do this, but we're going to assess this piece of technology. We're going to look at its design. We're going to look at the code that's inside there, and we're going to check, for example, that the code doesn't have susceptibility to these runtime errors. We're going to check mathematically in some cases. We're going to prove that that code only does what you claimed it was going to do and nothing else. And once we've gone through various different checks, we're going to accredit it, and we'll give it a big tick, and we'll say that this is trustworthy. We know that to be true to the best of our ability. And in fact, you could get all sorts of flavours of that. So level 7, I'm really sure. Level 1, maybe not. Maybe actually Sadie made that. And we like Sadie. We trust Sadie in the way she operates. So we'll give that level 1. Level 7, I'm going to get my mathematicians on this, and I'm going to double check, not just that your design's correct, but that it refines to the code that you've actually implemented. So what you said you were going to build and what you did build, they are the equivalents. Unfortunately for us, even if you went out and you bought that level 7 stuff, there's something in the way in which you architect a system and the way in which you operate a system that means that it's perfectly possible for us to manage these things so that together, as a combination, you still aren't secure. So that piece of baggage, although it's very useful, it's very important to us, and in some areas like, for example, I worked on the flight control system of a Eurofighter. Now, that was the first aircraft that would fall out of the sky if the computers failed because it didn't have a fixed chassis. In order to get the manoeuvrability in the air, it had computers making small tweaks to the planes of it, etc., so it could make its fighting manoeuvres. Well, that really matters then, that the code does exactly what you designed it to do. But nevertheless, we've also seen many examples of systems that unfortunately, when they're built of these parts, don't necessarily manifest what you would consider to be secure and safe behaviour. This is a great one. This, I'm sure, is one that should be familiar to you all, and maybe it isn't. So, trust us with your data, sign this consent, which usually means there's blanket consent, so we'll do what we want, we'll share it with whoever we want so that we can give you a great service, and we'll promise to make it anonymous for you. In most cases, that what they mean is pseudo-anonymization. So instead of saying Sadie, I'll be given some unique number, and that will be put in a database somewhere. Unfortunately, we know that as we aggregate all of this data and as we bring data together from disparate places, it's perfectly possible to de-anonymize. And so this particular control, even today, with the volumes of data and sharing that we face today, is already out of date. Wait while my best analyst decides what to do. So if you're working in an environment which is highly attacked, and I don't know whether Bradford University would consider itself to be one of those, but there are, for example, you can imagine defence contractors, banks, places where you would imagine people want to get in. The kinds of numbers of alerts that are raised on their intrusion detection systems every day will be possibly tens of thousands or higher. And they have a bunch of people who are designed to respond and to investigate this. Is this an attack we care about? Or is this an attack that will never cause us harm? And so what we've done in the industry is we've designed technology to help us try and sift that, to try and reduce the noise, to try and automate the process of deciding, do we care about this attack or not? Can we ignore it? And do you remember the malware example I gave you earlier? Well, unfortunately, that was one that fell foul of that. So they didn't respond to the one that really mattered, that really caused the harm. And so, unfortunately, what we do is we employ brilliant people, and they are brilliant, to think very hard about the meaning of these alerts and does it pertain to an attack that we care about. But we're limited by the number of those people that exist. And we put them in things that we call SOCs in the business, not SOCs, SOCs, Security Operations Centres. And we're building them all around the world now. And we have a capacity challenge. We can't fill them with enough brilliant minds, people that will actually sift through these alerts. So for those of you who are students in the room who are looking for a steady career, I can tell you now you will always work if you become a cybersecurity person, particularly if you're on the analyst side. What I can also tell you, in terms of the challenge we face, is that what we need is real creativity in that space. We're facing really creative attacks. We need people that can think laterally. So that means not just computer scientists. We want artists. We want people that think about space and time a different way. Maybe some architecture students in there. All sorts of philosophers. People that might be able to see it through a different lens. Perhaps the lens through which the attacker sees us. And this is the last one of these. And I know I'm at time, so I'll be quiet soon. I am small enough that no one would do this to me. Look, sand, head. Unfortunately, of course, that worked for many years because it was true that most of the attacks were leveraged against large organisations. That was very true. And I can remember when I was working in industry, very large blue chip organisations would get hacked. They'd get their critical database encrypted by the hacker. Maybe that's customer data, maybe that's new product design. And they would be held to ransom for the decryption key. And they would typically pay. And organisations like ours would be there, present in the background, aware that they would probably pay, but we'd go in and help clean up. Everybody would be very worried. Has there been backdoors left? Is there other stuff, other technology present in this environment? How do we know they've gone? How do we know this can't happen to us again? How do we fix the holes? That kind of thing. But these are large organisations. But what we've seen in recent years, as we've seen a de-skilling of some of the ways in which you can attack, and get access to these systems, we've also seen a kind of expansion in the middle to small enterprise market from people around the world. So what they do is a numbers game, sales really, same thing, funnel. So it doesn't cost you much to launch the attack, so you can throw it at lots more organisations. And so you may as well throw it at smaller organisations. You charge them less, so the coercion is smaller, so the payout is different, it's less, but you do it at scale. So it works for you. There's economies there. And so unfortunately, this no longer works, although it has been very effective. It also no longer works as we see a change in the regulatory environment. So as we see legislation, for example, looking to protect personal data being held by organisations, people that might bill you for stuff, services that you have contracts on, that kind of thing, what we're seeing is much smaller organisations potentially carrying risk, and risk relating to cyber assets that they have within them. And unfortunately, at the same time, they don't have many staff that really understand that risk. So there you go. For anyone else looking for a career change, there's certainly opportunity there. And I wanted to finish off with some of the other opportunities and gaps that we see. And so, although this is fundamentally at its core, cyber has technology at its core, one of the biggest challenges we face really is understanding the risk associated with it. We find it incredibly hard to quantify, to really understand harm that we might face. And that's a challenge because it doesn't incentivize necessarily the right kinds of solutions to be brought forward. So we don't know how we measure it, so we're not collecting data on it. We find it very hard to predict how risk is aggregating in our systems. Do we have a systemic problem, like a subprime mortgage problem? Do we have vulnerabilities so persistent and pervasive through our systems that actually one day soon something could happen that might actually cause such a significant damage and harm across so many different systems that we would be put in a very difficult situation? At the moment, we don't have the models to understand that. So we don't know how to describe it, and we don't understand how to predict it, which means we find it very hard to insure for it as well. And I had the opportunity to see somebody deliver a fascinating speech, the chairman of AIG recently, and he was talking about how the insurance industry had grown in the last couple hundred years, and how what he saw insurance was enabling organisations to take risk, to be brave. And we've seen in recent years a growing portfolio of cyber insurance products available, not really for individuals, for organisations, but with lots of small print, lots of this is not covered, this is not covered. So we've yet to see a real maturing of that industry, but it will be driven in part by a better understanding of risk. And so the question is, do we understand how we engage with cyberspace? Do we understand where we really feel harm so that we might better protect ourselves? And where we are custodians of organisations, of our friends, our families, of the UK, of global cyber citizens, however we see ourselves, do we understand the role that we have to play? And there's some science there, and it will bring together different sciences. And unfortunately, we don't yet know how to integrate them. So we don't really know how you orchestrate across the question of economics, the question of people and psychology and sociology, with the question of how we might begin to quantify the relationship between theoretical mathematical principles that are underlying some of our controls with very pragmatic technologies that are sitting underneath other of the controls. And that brings me really to one of the, if I had $10 million to invest, where I stick my money comments, and it's around this, situational awareness, because ultimately what we need is we need to understand what's happening as it shifts around us. And some of this stuff takes place at pace, at great pace, and some of this stuff takes place very, 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 very slowly and quietly. And some of the more sophisticated attacks create a lot of noise over here to do something very quiet over here. And the question is, how do we understand what's happening to us? And how do we orchestrate? How do we bring together people and what we need from them with technology and where we best put it in an era of limited resource, with where this is emanating from around the world, where this is emanating from in our societies? How do we construct collaborations between commercial enterprise and civic society, etc.? And that is an orchestration game. That's not an architecture solution. You don't make it up once, sign it off, accredit it in those days, and then expect the world to look like that for very much longer. I can tell you now it doesn't. We used to work on security accreditations for the military. You could guarantee the day after it was deployed they were operating a different system. And so this is about orchestration. This is about a conductor bringing together all of these pieces, all of these different instruments, and some of them are people and some of them are technology, so that at any single point in time, I know exactly where the greatest harm is going to be felt, and I can put my resource there, and frankly, I can ignore the rest of it. And that's the name of the game. And so ultimately, what you may find is that we look towards concepts of mindfulness in conjunction with concepts of what looks like very traditional science and technology, and we worry about how we're going to bring them together. And so what we've been doing recently, and this is a global effort, we've been looking at what it means to have cybersecurity capacity, what it means as a nation to have cybersecurity capacity, and how that relates. And I'll tell you now, the 5 dimensions we work with there, and there's some imagery from this effort, they join together law and regulation, they join together technology, defense technology, they join together society and understanding of culture, and they join together policy and the ability to architect national strategies and to conduct oneself on an international stage. And this is my final slide, and then I will sit down. And so this really is dynamic. It plays out differently each time. The conductor needs to understand each of the requirements across this orchestra and to be able to bring it together at just the right tempo, in just the right way, so that we experience what we need in terms of cybersecurity. And so I think what we have to understand is that what we have here is human technology interaction, and that is a form of smart glue in this environment. It's conductive. We do stuff through it. It's productive. It creates. Stuff emerges. And that might be social lives, that might be new ideas, new intellectual property. It might be new ways to solve how we feed 9 billion people, or whatever it may be. But it's productive and it's creative, and it's complex to understand, and it's a very moving target. And there's almost a notion of physics. There could be a chemistry here. There's certainly a causal nature, and it's across all scales. It somehow relates you as an individual to you and your organizations, to us as humans, and to us across the world, across nations. And in this, there's consequence. And therefore, I would conclude that cybersecurity is certainly, for me at least, and I hope I've persuaded some of you, currently the ultimate human technology challenge. Thank you.